Week 11 of the NFL season is upon us. We're in the final stretch territory. We're almost towards Thanksgiving and beyond, heading into the winter, and there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I don't know how much of an indicator this week is going to be, because I'd be lying to you if I said a lot of these matchups looked glamorous on paper. But we gotta take what we can get. There's only so many weeks in a football season. Plus, I gotta try and do better with my predictions this week. Last weekend, I posted a measly 9-5 record, and I'm looking to bounce back strong here. And the first game of the week could actually be one of the most promising. Thursday night, the Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals. A huge AFC North battle. Funny enough, both teams are coming off really heartbreaking losses. The Ravens choked a game they absolutely should not have lost to the Browns, while the Bengals struggled early on to keep up with a red-hot CJ Stroud. But even so, I'd expect a good game here. Usually the Ravens and the Bengals give us some very promising matchups, and I don't see why this one would be any different. The Bengals at this point in their season need to play with some desperation, and the Ravens on the other hand need to make sure that they stay up in first place in the AFC North. This is a pretty hard pick. The Ravens are at home, but at the same time, these teams usually split every season, I feel like. Plus, Joe Burrow wasn't completely healthy the last time they played each other. But I think I'm still going to go with the Baltimore Ravens. They choked away that Browns game. I mean, realistically, they should have just won that one. They were up by multiple scores early on, but they let their foot off the gas. And while the Bengals have looked relatively hot, aside from that Texans game the other day, I do think that they have kind of taken advantage of playing some struggling teams, like the Niners when they were on their skid, the Bills when they were on theirs. The Bengals in general haven't been winning the most pretty games in the world, and the Ravens generally have been a more consistent team, and their defense is pretty trustworthy, so I think I'm going to give this one to the Ravens in a pretty close game. Now for the Sunday slot games. There's no London or Germany matchup this time, so we head straight to 1 p.m. where we start with the Cowboys and the Panthers. And oh dear lord, somebody pray for the Panthers. This is going to be an absolute disaster. The Panthers looked absolutely terrible against the Bears last week. They have no offense to speak of. They're banged up on the defensive side of the ball, and the Cowboys make a habit of destroying bad teams. We just saw it against the Giants last week, amongst a couple of others recently. Dak's been looking real good as of late, and against a banged-up Panthers secondary, that should most definitely continue in what should be a very easy win for the Cowboys. Next up is the Steelers versus the Browns, another interesting AFC North battle, and depending on how the Ravens-Bengals game goes, this game could have major implications on who wins the AFC North. As for who I'd expect to win this, for a while I was definitely on the Browns train. Both teams are awful at offense, but the Browns defense as a unit is just a bit more consistent than the Steelers. But recently we found out that Deshaun Watson is going down with season-ending surgery, which means the Browns offense is going to be even more abysmal than what we know it as. Without Watson and no Nick Chubb, of course, I don't know how they're going to move the ball downfield at all. The Steelers may struggle offensively with their terrible offensive coordinator and inconsistent quarterback play, but they usually figure it out come like the fourth quarter, and that's probably going to happen with no real resistance from the Browns on their offense. So I gotta give this one to the Steelers in what will probably be a very ugly game. Next is actually another divisional battle, this time the Bears versus the Lions, although let's be honest, this one may not be so much of an actual battle. The Bears are coming off a surprising win, and they are supposed to be getting Justin Fields back most likely, I'd say, which could be a pretty big boost for them. Maybe they'll play with a lot more confidence, but they are playing a Lions team that is in a way better place. This Lions team has been very consistent all season. They've been delivering upon all the hype they've shown the last couple of seasons, and their offense is really clicking. They looked amazing against the Chargers. This Bears defense isn't that great either, and I think the Lions should only get into more of a rhythm from here on out. They're fully healthy again with their backfield, with that two-headed monster of Gibbs and Montgomery. Amon-Ra St. Brown just had another fantastic game. The Lions are just going to be able to produce more points, and the Bears are just way too inconsistent to trust, so Lions should win this one by multiple scores. Next up, the Chargers play the Packers, and it's kind of wild to me that the Packers are only one game worse overall record-wise than the Chargers, as they feel like two vastly different teams in two entirely different places. The Chargers are below 500, but a lot of it comes down to just a crappy defense. Justin Herbert and those boys have definitely gotten the job done. They just can't get any sort of reliable stops from the other side of the ball. And the Packers, on the other hand, I mean, they've taken advantage of beating some bad teams. They haven't produced much offensively. Their defense has been a letdown and very banged up overall, so it's hard to imagine they can actually beat this Chargers team. The Packers haven't proved much of anything. They almost beat the Steelers, yeah, but almost doesn't really count for that much, especially because the Steelers themselves are really not that good despite what their record might say. I feel like the Chargers should just be running circles around the Pack. Maybe this game could be close score-wise because the Chargers defense is but come on. Do you really expect Jordan Love to be able to replicate something that Justin Herbert does regularly? Maybe for a couple of quarters, but over the span of a game? Absolutely not. Give me the Chargers. Moving on, we have what could actually be a sneaky interesting game. The Cardinals versus the Texans. Both teams are actually coming off big wins. The Texans upset the Bengals, and CJ Stroud continues his miracle run as a godlike rookie, while the Cardinals, with Kyler Murray back, rally around him to get a big win over the Falcons. I think this game's going to be closer than people think, and I wouldn't even be surprised if the Cardinals won it. The Texans are overdue for a loss. They've definitely been overachieving. However, I'd be a fool to not remain with the Texans here. They've continued to prove themselves week after week, and they're on a massive hot streak. CJ Stroud looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and against a Cardinals team that is lacking talent, he should be able to continue to light up the scoreboard, and with Kyler Murray maybe still shaking off the rust and maybe not being in his full form, you'd expect the Texans to just have a better chance of winning this game. But again, don't be surprised if it ends up being pretty close. Moving on, we have the Titans versus the Jags. I really don't know what to think of this. The Jags are obviously the better team, but both sides are coming off a very rough week. The Jags were riddled with mistakes in that loss to the 49ers. They showed they still have a long way to go before they're a serious contender, but the Titans have continued to struggle week after week. They have a rookie quarterback who's shown ups and downs. They can't move the football that well. This Titans team just seems like they're out of their primes at this point. I think this game could be an absolute disaster. But generally, I think you have to trust the Jags here. They've just been a lot more consistent. The Titans are a really bad team, and while the Jags do have some duds, they also have shown some great performances this year. They have a lot more upside. They have the more trustworthy quarterback, so I'll go with the Jags. Okay, but what about the Raiders versus the Dolphins? The Dolphins are coming back from a bye week. Hopefully they're a bit healthier. And they're playing against a Raiders team that surprisingly find themselves at 500 after 10 weeks. Since firing Josh McDaniels, this team has shown a lot of life, a lot of fight, and they have a serious opportunity to be in that AFC wildcard race. Could they continue that momentum against the Dolphins? Well, I'm going to pump the brakes here. It's very much possible. The Dolphins are a very fraudulent team, but the Raiders haven't exactly beaten anyone special yet. They beat the Tommy DeVito Giants and a Jets team that can't move the football to save their lives. Against a Dolphins team with a very explosive offense, it's going to be a very different dynamic. And unfortunately for the Raiders, the Dolphins have had an opportunity to get a bit healthier after their bye week. Maybe Jalen Waddle healed up a bit. Their running back room is back in full force. This Dolphins team's going to be firing on all cylinders after that well-needed rest. And I don't think Aiden O'Connell's going to be able to keep up offensively. So Dolphins should be winning this one rather easily. They're not above 500, the Raiders, so Dolphins will not be frauds here. They got it. Next, unfortunately, is the Giants versus the Commanders. I really have nothing to say here. The Giants are absolutely terrible. As a Giants fan, it breaks my heart, but they don't stand a chance of beating anybody right now with Tommy DeVito at quarterback. It's just not going to happen. They're literally afraid to throw the football. They're fighting on the sidelines. The defense is starting to give up on everything, and the Commanders are showing some forward momentum. They're only 4-6 right now, but Sam Howell the last couple of weeks has looked really good, and I think he's probably going to torch that Giants defense as they continue to fight amongst themselves, as the Commanders get a well-needed, easy win. Moving into the 4 p.m. slot, first you have the Buccaneers versus the 49ers. Both teams got a well-needed bounce-back blowout victory last weekend. The Niners are finally starting to look more like their old selves after a 3-game skid. Brock Purdy looks more normal again, the wide receiver situation is healthier, McCaffrey and Kittle are doing their thing still, but more importantly, we saw a big step up out of that defense against a reasonably respectable Jags team. It would seem that this Nick Bosa and Chase Young tandem could be very dangerous. They dominated in that Jaguars game, and there's a lot of room to believe that will continue against a Buccaneers team that is not what they used to be in terms of their offensive line. I'm of the belief that the Buccaneers are a bit underrated still. They have been a very competitive team this year. I think they could actually make this a somewhat decent game, but with how the Niners looked last weekend, it's hard to give them much hope here. As much as I respect Baker for having a bounce-back year and that Bucs team for kind of defying expectations, they just shouldn't have it in them to make this much of a game. The Niners are way too scary, and they're probably going to start to get really hot. The next game, though, is one that's super intriguing. The Jets and the Bills. You know, if this was weeks and weeks ago, we'd be saying Bills should win this no problem, but right now, they do not look like themselves. They have been losing game after game after game. Their offense looks absolutely terrible, even losing a game to the Broncos for crying out loud. So many crucial mistakes by Josh Allen, and with the running back situation, the fumbles, they just can't stop turning the ball over. They seem like they lack confidence still, like they just don't want it enough, like they're super lost. And while the Jets themselves are also not a great team, this Bills team did lose to the Jets in week 1. This Jets defense is very confident in their abilities against Josh Allen. The Bills have just not been a great football team this year, and it really seems like their Super Bowl window is closing before our very eyes. And we're in a situation now where I don't even know if I can confidently say they can defeat the Jets. Honestly, it's not far-fetched if you want to pick the Jets. They've been very good defensively against some high-octane offenses, including the Bills themselves. That defense is going to keep them in the game, and we know for a fact they're going to force a lot of turnovers against Josh Allen. But can they do enough on the offense side of the ball to actually do enough to win the football game, to capitalize on these mistakes? I really don't know if they can. With how bad they've looked the last handful of weeks, I don't know who I can trust more, Josh Allen or Zach Wilson. That sounds ridiculous to say, but that's the world we live in right now. If it comes down to which offense is going to do more in the clutch, I think you probably want to give this one to the Bills. I say that with a very big lack of confidence, but the Jets just can't move the ball for crap. And there's no way the Bills continue to lose, right? The Jets can't have anything nice, and this Bills team is overdue for a good victory. So with great hesitance, I'm picking the Buffalo Bills. And wrapping up the 4 p.m. games on Sunday is the Seahawks versus the Rams, a Week 1 rematch where Seattle actually found themselves getting punched in the mouths by a Rams team that was on a bit of a resurgence at that time. Since then, they've been on a massive skid, and Matt Stafford's health is also in question here. He's had a couple of weeks to rest up, but even then, we don't know if he's going to be fully back to normal. He's had a bad injury history in the past that usually warrants his ability to play well, and this time may be no different. Plus, Seattle have been in a lot more of a stride since that bad game in Week 1. Their offense has been putting up lots of points, as you'd expect to, and with the Rams' health being in question on that side of the ball, Seattle should be able to outpace them. It's going to be tough to deal with Aaron Donald and whatnot, but they've had a lot of time to game plan and think about where they went wrong in the last one. Seattle are just the better football team, so I'm giving it to the Hawks. And on Sunday night, the Broncos somehow find themselves back in prime time yet again, taking on the Minnesota Vikings. Surprisingly, both of these teams are on a hot streak. Both sides have beaten some quality opponents in recent weeks. The Vikings offense has been flying with Josh Dobbs, while the Broncos defense has been stepping up and playing very well against the likes of Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen. And Denver's been scoring points. I know, miracles really can happen. When these two meet, Who knows what's going to happen? Both sides are definitely overdue for a loss, but I'm going to stick with the red-hot Vikings, as they've just looked really good with Josh Dobbs running this offense, and Justin Jefferson could be coming back from IR this week to play, which could only add another layer of danger to an already really good offense. Josh Dobbs just feels like the main character, the main protagonist of this NFL season, if you will. I feel like it's meant to be for him to lead this Vikings team to the promised land in the playoffs. So I'm going to stick with Minnesota. I like the brand of football they're playing on both sides right now, and I think they'll overwhelm a Broncos team, which definitely is not that good and have been winning some pretty ugly games. And then that leads us to Monday night, a Super Bowl rematch, the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Kansas City Chiefs. What I think this game comes down to is that Eagles secondary against the Chiefs wide receivers. The Eagles defense has been letting up a lot of yards through the air this season, and they're playing against freaking Patrick Mahomes, which probably doesn't bode well for them. They're not going to do very well against Travis Kelce, we know that for a fact, but if they can maybe slow down an unreliable Chiefs wide receiver core, they might have a chance at this. The Chiefs receivers have by no means been dominant, and they've been dropping a lot of balls, and if this Eagles secondary can step up and make it so they can't get a lot of easy separation, that pass rush should be able to get into Pat Mahomes' head very easily in this game. So it's going to be on that Eagles defensive game plan to maybe do enough and possibly get lucky with some key drops. However, I am of the belief the Eagles will come up short and that the Chiefs are going to edge out a close win. And I say that for a few reasons. One, that Eagles secondary is just too untrustworthy. I would not believe in them to stop Patrick Mahomes for an entire game. Two, the Chiefs defense often goes underlooked. It's been a very solid unit this season, and I think if the Eagles defense keeps their team in the game, the Chiefs defense can very much do the same. But also, on top of those things, the Eagles have not played a complete game yet. The Chiefs haven't looked amazing every single game this season either, but we've seen some very well-rounded, complete matchups out of them where they truly do dominate. The Eagles, every single game, I feel like they've had their struggles. They've taken their foot off the gas in some scenarios as well. I don't really like it. And against a Chiefs team, one of the best teams in the league, if not the best, that's not going to fly. If you don't bring your A game, you're going to lose. And until the Eagles actually show me they can play a full 60 minutes of football, I'm not going to pick them in this situation. But yeah, I think I'm going to go with the Chiefs and call it there. So that's going to wrap up my Week 11 predictions for the NFL. Like I said, we're probably going to have some very low lows and some very high highs this week in terms of the action and entertainment that we can get. I'm looking forward to it though. There's some banger matchups up ahead. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Give this video a like as well, and subscribe to the channel for more NFL content. Peace.